The snow drifted down in thick, lazy flakes, catching the glow of the iron lanterns that lined the southern carriage station. I sat on the wooden bench with my back against the cold stone wall, a cup of mulled wine gone lukewarm in my hands. The wind carried the faint sound of distant singing from the taverns closer to the square. Every window in the city seemed to hold light and warmth tonight. Every door seemed to open for someone except mine. I had spent 40 winters building walls around myself without ever noticing how high they had grown. Warehouses full of grain and cloth, ledgers that balanced every night, a house of pale stone that looked down over the market square, its 3 extra bedrooms empty for years. People called me fortunate. They said the name Vane carried weight in every counting house from here to the river ports. They were not wrong, but on this night, with the festival lanterns burning and the smell of spiced bread drifting from every bakery, the weight felt only like silence. My parents had been gone a long time. My sister had married far away and stopped sending invitations after too many polite refusals on my part. The last woman who had tried to share my life had left because she grew tired of watching me choose cargo manifests over her. I had everything a man was supposed to want, and nothing that made a house feel lived in. I lifted the cup again. The wine tasted flat. A small voice broke the quiet. "You look sad." I turned. A boy stood a few paces away, half hidden by the lantern post. He could not have been more than 5. Green skin, the color of old moss, black hair that curled wildly around small curved tusks, no longer than my thumb. He wore a red wool coat that had once been too big and was now too small, the cuffs frayed, the hem dragging. His yellow eyes were bright and unafraid in the way only children's eyes can be. I cleared my throat. "Shouldn't you be home?" He shook his head once. "Mother is inside the shop. She's asking if they have any old bread left. We are hungry." He said it plainly, as if hunger on a festival night was ordinary. I looked past him toward the shuttered door of the baker's shop. Through the narrow gap I could see a figure moving, thin shoulders wrapped in a cloak far too light for the weather. "What is your name?" I asked. "Rurik." He stepped closer without being invited and sat on the far end of the bench, small boots dangling. "What is yours?" I hesitated. Names carried weight here, especially mine. But the boy's face held no calculation, only simple curiosity. "Alaric." He nodded as if that settled something important. "It is the East Festival tonight," he said. "Did you get any gifts?" "No." Rurik looked down at his boots. "I did not either. Mother says the East God forgot us again. But I think maybe he did not forget. Maybe he just does not know where to leave the presents because we do not have a house." The words landed heavier than they should have. A child with no roof, no warm meal, no certainty of tomorrow, still trying to find a reason why the world had not completely abandoned him. I studied the snow gathering on the cobbles. "Where do you sleep?" "Different places. Sometimes the poorhouse. Sometimes with Mother's friends. But her friend has a new man now, and he does not like orc children. Tonight Mother said if we can buy something small, we might sit in one of the river taverns until morning." He shivered once, but did not complain. I had 3 empty bedrooms and a fire that had burned all day without anyone to feel its heat. The shop door opened. A woman stepped out, cloak clutched tight, a small cloth sack in one hand. She saw the boy beside me and her face changed in an instant. She crossed the distance in 3 quick strides. "Rurik, I told you to stay by the door!" Her voice was low, urgent. When her eyes met mine, they flicked away at once. She pulled the boy behind her with one arm. "I am sorry, sir. My son did not mean to trouble you." She was thin, in the way people become when they have gone too long without enough. Her cloak was patched at the shoulder. Snow already clung to the hem. The yellow eyes were the same as the boy's, only older and far more guarded. I rose slowly so as not to startle her. He was not troubling me. "My name is Alaric." She held the sack closer to her chest. "I am Mara." I glanced at the boy again. He had stopped shivering only because he was pressed against his mother's leg. The wind cut sharper now. "Where will you go tonight?" I asked. "There is a place by the river docks. If we buy a bowl of soup, they let people sit by the hearth until the watch changes. We can stay until morning if we are quiet." I thought of the stone house on the hill, the unused rooms, the kitchen that still held bread and cold meat and soup that could be warmed in minutes. I thought of every night I had returned to empty hallways and the sound of my own footsteps. "You can stay with me, I said. 2 rooms, separate, locks on the doors, food, no conditions, no repayment. Just one warm night for a child on the East Festival." Mara stepped back. The movement was small but unmistakable. I had seen that look before in merchants who had been cheated too many times. It was the look of someone who had learned that kindness often arrived with a price. "I do not accept that kind of help," she said quietly. I kept my voice even. 2 rooms. You keep the keys. I will not enter. There is bread, cheese, and soup left from midday. You and your son can eat until you are full. In the morning you leave if you wish. That is all." Rurik tugged at her cloak. "Mother, I am cold." Mara closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the fight had gone out of her shoulders. "Only one night," she said. I nodded. "Only one night." The carriage I hired waited at the far end of the station. I led them to it without another word. Mara kept the boy between us the entire walk, one hand on his shoulder. She did not look at me again until the carriage door closed and the wheels began to turn toward the hill. Behind us, the lanterns of the station grew smaller in the falling snow. Ahead, the city lights blurred into a single warm glow. I sat across from them in the dim carriage and said nothing. There was nothing left to say that would not sound like a promise I had not yet earned the right to make. Rurik leaned against his mother and closed his eyes. Mara watched the snow through the small window, her fingers never leaving the boy's coat. I looked at my own hands still holding the cold cup I had forgotten to set down, and wondered when my house had stopped being a home and become only a roof. The carriage wheels crunched over the fresh snow as we climbed the long slope toward the house. I sat facing them in the narrow space, the cup of cold wine still in my hands, though I no longer felt like drinking it. Mara kept one arm around Rurik and the other hand resting on the door latch, as if she expected the carriage to stop at any moment and force her to choose between staying or running. The boy had fallen asleep against her side, small breaths fogging the window glass. Every so often, his fingers tightened in her cloak, even in sleep. The stone house appeared through the falling snow like a pale cliff. Its windows were dark except for the single lantern left burning by the gate. When the carriage halted, the doorkeeper stepped out with a lantern of his own. He took one look at the 2 figures behind me, opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had worked for me long enough to know when questions were not welcome. Rurik woke as I helped him down. He stood in the courtyard and tilted his head all the way back to see the top of the door. "You live in a castle," he whispered. I almost smiled. "No. Just a house that grew too large for one person." Inside, the main hall still held the heat of the day's fire. The coals glowed red behind the iron screen, casting long shadows across the tapestries and the heavy oak table that had never seated more than 2. Rurik stopped just inside the threshold and refused to step farther until I moved first. His boots left small wet prints on the stone floor. Mara's eyes moved across the room quickly, cataloging exits, the height of the ceilings, the value of the silver candlesticks. She did not relax. I led them up the wide staircase to the guest wing. 2 rooms stood side by side, each with its own lock and key. I lit the lamps, pulled extra blankets from the cedar chest, and set a basin of warm water on the washstand in each room. The towels were clean but plain. I had never thought to buy softer ones. "There is bread in the kitchen," I said. "Soup that can be warmed, cold meat and cheese. Take whatever you need. The cook left for the night, but the larder's open." Mara stood in the hallway between the 2 doors, the cloth sack still clutched to her chest. For the first time since I had met her, her shoulders dropped a fraction. "You do not know what this means," she said quietly. 3 weeks, I have not slept a full night without listening for footsteps outside whatever door we found. I waited. She continued, voice low so the boy would not hear every word. "I worked in a kitchen for a dwarf tavern near the east gate. Good work, steady. Then the tax collectors came and the tavern closed. The landlord wanted his rent. When I could not pay, he put our things on the street. I tried other kitchens. They saw the child first, then they saw my face. Orc women with small sons do not get hired easily. We slept in the poorhouse when there was space. We slept under the bridge when there was not. Last night we slept in the doorway of a closed shop until the watch moved us on." Rurik had already gone into one of the rooms and was touching the edge of the bed with one finger, testing whether it would disappear. I looked at the boy's thin coat and the way Mara's hands trembled slightly from cold and exhaustion. I had 3 warehouses, 2 ships under contract, and enough silver in the cellars to buy this entire street if I wished. The shame that rose in me was sharp and sudden. "Tomorrow I can speak to people in the Merchants Guild," I said. "There may be work that suits you, ledgers, checking goods, speaking with customers, nothing given for free, a trial period, proper wages if it works." Mara's head came up. "I do not want charity. It would not be charity. If you can do the work, you keep the work. If you cannot, you leave. That is all." She studied my face for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" I thought of the question the boy had asked at the station. I thought of every night I had returned to this house and heard only my own footsteps. "Because your son asked me if I was sad," I said. "And I realized I have been sad for a very long time." She did not answer. She only nodded once, then turned and went into the room with Rurik. I heard the lock turn on the inside. I went downstairs and stood in the kitchen for a while, staring at the cold hearth. Eventually, I banked the fire in the main hall and climbed to my own room. Sleep did not come easily. I kept listening for sounds from the guest wing. Footsteps, voices, the door opening again, as they decided to leave after all. There was only silence. In the morning, I woke to the smell of wood smoke and the low sound of voices. When I reached the kitchen, Rurik was already at the table, swinging his legs. Mara stood near the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of soup that had clearly been reheated more than once. She had found the bread and was slicing it with careful, economical movements. I had planned to have the cook prepare something proper. Instead, I took the pan myself. The toast came out too dark on one side. The eggs were overcooked. The soup I reheated again because I did not know what else to do. Rurik ate as though he had never seen food before. He did not speak much, but every few bites he looked up at me with the same bright, assessing eyes. Mara ate more slowly. When the bowl was empty, she set the spoon down and looked at me across the table. "The bed was too soft," she said. "I kept waiting for the floor to tilt or someone to shout outside. The quiet was worse than the noise." I nodded. I understood that kind of waiting. She glanced toward the window where snow still fell. "We can leave after we help clean. You have been kind. We will not take more than we were offered." "You do not have to leave today," I said. "Stay until you have somewhere steady. The rooms are empty anyway." Mara's mouth tightened. I could see the refusal forming. Rurik spoke first, voice small but clear. "Can we stay one more night? The bed did not bite me." A sound escaped Mara that might have been a laugh if it had not been so tired. She reached over and smoothed the boy's wild hair with one hand. "One more night," she said at last. "Then we will see." I did not push. I only poured more tea into her cup and watched the steam rise between us. Outside, the snow kept falling, softening the edges of the city. Inside the kitchen, the fire crackled and the table held 3 plates instead of 1. It was a small change. It felt larger than any contract I had signed in years. Mara left for the interview at the Vane warehouse 3 mornings later. I did not go with her. I sent a short note to Benton, the man who had managed my warehouse for 12 years, and asked him to speak with her himself. He was a hard man, gray at the temples and impatient with excuses, but he judged work the way a mason judges stone. If it held, it held. If it did not, he said so plainly. She returned in the late afternoon with snow on her shoulders and her hands still red from the cold walk. Rurik was drawing on a scrap of paper at the kitchen table when she came in. She stood in the doorway for a moment as if she needed to steady herself before speaking. "He said I could try for a month," she told me. "He asked about numbers and weights and how I would speak to a merchant who tried to claim 3 barrels he had not paid for. I answered. He did not smile, but he did not send me away either." I nodded. Benton does not smile for anyone. If he said a month, he means it. She looked down at her gloves. "I will start in 3 days. The room I found near the East Market will be ready by then. We will not trouble you longer than that." Rurik did not look up from his drawing, but his shoulders went still. 3 days later, she walked to the warehouse before the sun had fully risen. I stayed away on purpose. When I finally went down in the afternoon to check the ledgers, Benton was waiting by the counting desk with his arms folded. "The Orc woman works," he said without greeting. "She moves fast. Her hand is clear. She does not complain when a barrel is heavier than it should be. If you are keeping her here out of pity, do not. She will hate you for it." "I am not," I said. He grunted. "Good. 1-month trial. After that we see." Mara came home each evening with her cloak dusted in flour and her fingers stained from ink. The first week she was tight as a bowstring. Every time someone called her name, she straightened as if expecting a blow. When she knocked over a small pot of ink on the second day, she went white and began apologizing before the ink had even spread. Benton threw her a rag and told her to clean it and then record the loss in the accident ledger. She stood frozen for several seconds, as if the simplicity of the instruction did not make sense. By the end of the second week, the tension had eased a little. She reorganized a corner of the warehouse that had been chaotic for months. She caught a traveling merchant trying to claim 3 extra sacks of salt that had not been loaded. She helped an old widow negotiate a delayed payment without breaking any of the guild rules. Customers began asking specifically for the woman who kept the books because she remembered every detail without needing to check twice. Rurik changed more slowly. I arranged for an old tutor who had once taught the children of several merchant families to come 3 afternoons a week. When I mentioned the lessons, Mara's face closed. "I will pay when I can," she said. "It is not payment," I answered. "The Merchants Guild keeps a small fund for children who have no steady schooling. It is listed as a scholarship. Your son's name goes in the ledger like any other. There is no debt to me." She studied me for a long time before she nodded. Rurik took to the lessons quickly. He liked maps best. He would sit at the kitchen table after supper and ask why the city walls followed the curve of the river, why the water never flowed backward even when the wind was strong, why people who owned large houses still only slept in one bed at night. The last question made me set my cup down and stare at the fire for several minutes before I could answer. 2 months after that first night at the carriage station, Mara came back from work with a small iron key in her hand. She stood in the hall and turned it over and over, as if she could not quite believe it was real. "I have a room," she said, "near the East Market. 1 room, a lock that works, and the landlord does not ask questions about orc children. It is small, but it is ours." Rurik ran to her and hugged her around the waist. She rested her hand on his head and closed her eyes for a moment. That evening they ate with me as usual. After Rurik had gone to wash his hands, Mara spoke quietly. "We will move tomorrow. You have done more than enough." I didn't argue. I only said the door would remain unlocked if they ever needed it. They left the next morning with their few belongings tied in a bundle. The house felt larger again the moment the door closed behind them. I returned to my ledgers and my meetings, but I found myself listening for the sound of small boots on the stairs or the low murmur of Mara's voice in the kitchen. 3 evenings later there was a knock. Rurik stood on the step holding a half-eaten pastry from the market. "Mother said we could come for supper if you're not busy," he announced. Mara stood a pace behind him, cloak dusted with snow, looking as though she might still turn and leave. I stepped aside. They came often after that, sometimes only for an hour, sometimes until the fire burned low. Rurik treated the house like a second home, running straight to the kitchen to ask the cook if there were any extra biscuits. Mara began to stay longer. She would sit by the hearth, with mending in her lap, while Rurik practiced his letters at the table. The rooms upstairs remained empty, but the main hall no longer echoed quite so loudly. One night, after Rurik had fallen asleep on the long bench with a book still open on his chest, Mara looked across the fire at me. "Do you regret letting us through your door that first night?" I watched the boy's small chest rise and fall. "No," I said. "Before you came, I was the one standing outside my own life." I did not even know I was cold until someone asked. She did not reply right away. When she finally smiled, it was small and tired and real, the first smile I had seen from her that did not carry the shadow of fear. She reached over and gently closed the book on Rurik's chest so the pages would not crease. We sat in the quiet until the coals settled. Outside, the snow kept falling on the city, but inside the house, the air felt different. Not warmer exactly, more occupied. More like a place that might someday remember how to be a home. A year after that first cold night at the carriage station, the house had changed in small ways that mattered more than I could explain. Mara still kept her room near the East Market, but she and Rurik came most evenings now. Rurik would burst through the door with snow in his hair and stories from his lessons. Mara would follow more quietly, carrying mending or a small bundle of herbs she had bought on the way. The kitchen table held 3 places more often than one. The long bench by the fire kept an extra blanket folded on the end because Rurik always fell asleep there before the evening ended. I'd been turning the words over in my mind for weeks. Every time I thought of speaking them, I found a reason to wait another day. Mara had built something steady with her own hands. She had work that paid fairly, a locked door she could call hers, and the quiet pride of someone who no longer needed to ask permission to exist. I had no right to ask her to give any of that up. Yet every time she and the boy left at night, the house felt larger and colder than it had before they arrived. One evening, the snow fell harder than usual. We ate in the kitchen because the main hall felt too formal. Rurik sat at the small side table practicing his letters by lamplight. Mara stood near the hearth, folding clean cloths from the wash. The firelight caught the green of her skin and turned it warmer. I watched her hands move, steady and careful, and knew I could not keep the words inside any longer. I set my cup down. "Mara," I said, "there is something I need to say clearly." She paused, a folded cloth still in her hands. "You do not need me to live," I continued. "You have work. You have savings. You have a room with a lock that belongs to you. You have raised your son through winters I cannot imagine. I know this. I respect it. But I also know that this house only feels like a home when you and Rurik are inside it. The rooms upstairs stay empty. The tables stay set, for one. I come back earlier every evening hoping to hear the door open. I do not want you to return because you have nowhere else. I want you to return because you choose to, because I choose to build something with you." Mara lowered the cloth slowly. Her yellow eyes searched my face as if she were reading a ledger for hidden mistakes. "Are you speaking of kindness?" she asked quietly. "Or of love?" I met her gaze without looking away. "Love." The words settled between us. Rurik had stopped writing. He watched us both with the open curiosity of a child who senses something important is happening. I went on, because stopping would have been easier than continuing. "I love the way you keep going, when every door has closed. I love the gentleness you still carry, even though the world has not been gentle with you. I love how you scold Rurik when he is careless and then kiss his forehead the moment he looks sorry. I love that you have never let hardship turn you bitter. I love the woman who stood in a snowstorm and still believed her son deserved to think the East God had not forgotten him." Mara's hands had gone still. Her eyes shone, but she did not look away. "I am afraid," she said. Her voice was low. "I am afraid that one day you will wake and see only the weight we bring. An orc woman and her son living under your roof. People will talk. Your guild will talk. Your life was clean before us." "I have lived a clean life for many years," I answered. "Clean and light and empty. I nearly died inside that emptiness without ever noticing. I do not want to spend what remains of my years being light. I want to be anchored. I want the two of you." Rurik set his quill down carefully. "Mother," he said, serious as only a 6-year-old can be, "is Uncle Alaric asking to be my father?" Mara made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. I moved around the table and knelt in front of the boy so we were at the same height. "If your mother agrees," I said, "and if you want it, I would be honored to care for you as my son. Not because I pity you, because I have come to need you both more than I knew a man could need anyone." Rurik studied my face for a long moment. Then he asked the question that undid me completely. "Next East Festival, will the god know where to leave my present?" My throat closed. I had to swallow twice before I could speak. "Yes," I managed. "He will know." Rurik launched himself forward and wrapped his arms around my neck. He was small and warm and smelled faintly of ink and wood smoke. I held him and felt something inside my chest shift into place for the first time in decades. Mara was crying openly now, quiet tears that she did not try to hide. She came to us and rested one hand on Rurik's back and the other on my shoulder. We stayed like that until the fire settled lower. Spring came slowly that year. The pear tree in the small courtyard behind the house bloomed later than usual, but when the white flowers finally opened, we held the ceremony there. It was not a grand affair. Benton came, along with the old tutor and 2 neighbors who had grown used to seeing an orc woman and a human merchant walking together. Rurik stood between us holding the simple silver ring on a small cushion, his face set in fierce concentration as if he carried the crown jewels of the kingdom. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my eyes on Mara. I thought I had built everything a man could want, I said. Warehouses, contracts, silver, a name that opened doors. I was wrong. You and your son taught me that the hardest and most necessary thing to build is a life that can hold other people. I want to build that life with you. Mara's voice was steady when she answered. I once believed that accepting help made me weak. You showed me that some hands reach out not to pull you down, but to stand beside you while you stand on your own. I choose to stand beside you now, not because I must, because I wish to. Rurik walked the few steps to us with the solemnity of a soldier on parade. He placed the ring in my palm with both hands, then stepped back and gave a small, proud nod. That night the lamps in the house stayed lit long after the last guest had gone. Rurik fell asleep in the room that had once been a guest room and was now simply his. Mara and I stood at the window overlooking the courtyard where the pear blossoms had already begun to fall like pale snow. She leaned against my side without speaking. I rested my hand at the small of her back and felt the steady warmth of her through the fabric. For the first time in many years, the silence inside me was not empty. It was full of breathing, of small footsteps that would return in the morning, of a future that no longer belonged only to me. The house had finally become what it was always meant to be, not a roof over one man's solitude, but a place where 3 lives had chosen to meet and stay. After the wedding, the house did not become quieter. It became busier in ways I had never expected. Mara did not step behind me and take a smaller place. She stepped beside me. Within the first year, she took over part of the warehouse records, then began sitting in on meetings with the other merchants. Her memory for numbers and faces proved sharper than most. When we began to speak of the families who still slept in doorways and under bridges during the long winters, it was Mara who understood what they needed before any of us did. She said, a mother without a roof does not first need speeches about dignity. She needs a safe place to put her child down for one night. She needs a hot meal that does not come with pity. She needs work that pays enough to stand on her own feet again. And she needs someone to look at her and see a person, not a problem. Together, we used part of the trading profits to open a winter shelter 2 streets from the southern carriage station, where I had first met Rurik. It was not a place that handed out stale bread and then locked the doors at dawn. There were clean beds, a kitchen that stayed hot through the night, a small room where people could wash, and another where someone sat every evening to help write letters or speak with employers who might have work. Children received lessons in the mornings. No one was asked to prove they deserved warmth. Every East festival, our family returned to that same station. We brought fresh bread, thick soup, wool cloaks, and simple wooden toys carved by one of the older men who now lived at the shelter. But Mara always gave the same instruction to anyone helping us distribute the gifts. Do not drop kindness on them from above, she would say. Ask their names, look into their eyes, let them choose what they take. They have already lost enough of their pride. Rurik grew tall and straight-backed. He kept his mother's yellow eyes and his father's quiet way of watching before he spoke. He never forgot the night we met. One East festival, when he was 12, he stood beside me while we ladled soup into bowls for a line of people. A young orc woman with a baby wrapped against her chest accepted her portion with both hands and a low word of thanks. Rurik watched her walk away, then turned to me. Father, he asked, do you ever think the East God really forgot me that first night? I looked at the boy, who now called me father, then at Mara further down the line, speaking gently with another mother whose hands shook from cold. The lanterns of the station glowed the same way they had glowed years ago. No, I said. I think sometimes the gods grow tired of being the only ones who remember. So they send someone with small hands and a brave question to do the remembering for them. That night you saw a stranger sitting alone and you asked if he was sad. Perhaps you were the one they sent. Rurik was quiet for a long time, ladle still in his hand. Then he asked, very seriously, So, I saved you too. I smiled. It was the same smile I'd given him the morning after our first night in the house, only deeper now. Yes, I said. You saved me before I even understood I needed saving. He nodded once, as if that settled something important, and turned back to the line. Years passed. The trading company grew. The shelter grew with it. People in Hymir began to speak of the vain name not only for its warehouses, but for the doors that stayed open when the snow came. I heard the stories sometimes and felt a quiet pride, but it was never the pride I had once felt in ledgers and contracts. It was quieter. It was the pride of a man who had once believed a full life could be measured in silver and had learned, too late and just in time, that it was measured in the faces that returned to his table. On the coldest nights, I still walked down to the southern station when the snow was falling. I would stand where I had once sat with a cup of cold wine and watch the lanterns make patterns on the fresh snow. Sometimes I brought Rurik with me. Sometimes Mara came too. We never stayed long. There was always warmth waiting for us at the top of the hill. But I needed to remember. I needed to remember the night a small voice had asked a lonely man if he was sad, and the even smaller voice that had answered, "Mother says the East God forgot us again." No, Rurik. The God did not forget. He simply waited for someone to look up from their own emptiness long enough to see the child standing in the snow. He waited for a man who had everything to realize he had nothing that mattered. He waited for a mother who had lost almost everything to still believe her son deserved to hope. That night, 3 strangers met at an empty station and chose, against every habit the world had taught them, to see one another. From that single choice, we built rooms that stayed warm, work that paid fairly, and a door that opened for whoever needed it next. That, I have come to believe, is the true gift of the East Festival. Not cakes, not toys, not gold. But the moment when a lonely man and a forgotten family stop being strangers and begin, together, to build a home large enough for the ones who will come after them. And every year, when the snow falls and the lanterns are lit again, I return to that station and give thanks that on one cold night I was seen, and that I learned, at last, how to see in return.